Welcome back to the farm, everyone. Someone's getting ready for their third day of preschool. And no, it's not Graham, it's Lenny. You having fun at preschool?
Yeah.
This balloon lasted a lot longer than the first one. Our oldest son starting preschool is kind of a big transition for us. We've been very fortunate to have the resources where Allie's been able to stay home and work part-time and help raise the kids and not have to take them to daycare. And because of that, this is a huge step forward for us in the development of our kids and Lenny in general, because he's at an age now where he's starting to get some independence. The first day was a little sad, a little rough, and it's an adjustment. We are very lucky, though, that Lenny and I are very similar in the fact that we are very easily motivated by thoughts of what snacks we're going to have while we work during the day. So just a few conversations about snack time and we're good to get out the door. Speaking of out the door, we'll let these little dinosaurs out. Don't everyone run at once. We just started letting the chickens out fully a week ago. We were a little weary at first because didn't know about the dogs. Murphy, the girl border collie, could not care less about them. Lucky, the golden retriever, as you just witnessed and heard, does enjoy a good chase, and he did have one in his mouth the other day briefly. I'm not still sure about him. And then O'Malley, the border collie, he's interested in them, more so just to watch them. He comes up here and stares at the door, never really chases them. He knows he's not supposed to. Lucky's the wild card, though, as they proceed to walk around and eat chicken poop like nasty little... You guys are terrible. Why are you rolling around in that kind of stuff? Kids and their bad habits, huh? Hey, stop smelling his junk. I've quickly realized that letting the chickens out is a no-brainer. They eat a fraction of the food from their food container because they're picking bugs and grubs and whatever from the yard. I don't even really want to know what they're eating. Instead of eating our food we have to pay for, not that it's expensive, they went from a bag of food a week, now they're eating maybe a half a bag, if not less, which that's pretty easy math. I'd rather run the risk of losing a couple of them to Mother Nature, wild creatures, and dogs than to have to pay for all that food. Chickens are not expensive to buy, though they do take a long time to foster to the age where they lay eggs. I just watched an ear of corn fall from that tree. How is that even possible? See that ear of corn down there by the edge of it? It just fell. I wonder if a squirrel took it up there. Loading the trebuchet for defense, maybe. I don't know. Allie's garden also looks phenomenal. Got to give credit to her on that. Of course, myself for the craftsmanship to put it together. I did nothing in terms of actually gardening. The flowers look especially beautiful. We have had some issues again with the golden retriever, who steals peppers and green beans and tomatoes, watermelons. He likes a lot of things. Never mind, he's not the only one. O'Malley also eats parts of flowers. You can see where he's ripped part of that off. We had pumpkins here. He took a lot of them, though I think they had some mildew issues and died anyways. He's kind of left the strawberries alone, which is nice. Look at that, we've got a waterhemp growing in the garden. Fascinating. Yeah, it's been a learn as we go type of project. Kind of like our farm. Still learn new stuff every day, and we've been doing it for a while. Grass. Nutritious and delicious for breakfast. Lucky I just caught you red-handed. What do you have right there? Tomato? Murphy can tell by the tone of my voice that someone's in trouble. It was not me. It wasn't me. You know what? As long as someone is eating stuff from the garden, it doesn't really matter who. If it's a dog, that's a benefit to us anyways, because the garden's cheaper than their food. I know what the million-dollar question is right now. What in the world have you been up to lately, Andy? And the answer is absolutely nothing of entertainment value. Things are changing really fast. Harvest is probably 3 weeks away on those early planted soybeans. Of course, we will not pick any corn early. We don't have the capability to dry it, and the economics aren't there to take it to an elevator, unless you're going to like ADM in Decatur and getting some crazy discount. Still have not got the combines or anything out for harvest. We'll probably work on that in the next couple weeks. Chris and Jeff have been doing the last round of mowing. That's about done. Dad and I are still waiting to kind of get some final fertilizer prices. Not heard good things in that department. And we've just been cleaning things up. Roadsides, ditches, lanes, we're working on. I bought this little spot sprayer, 40 gallons from Rural King. I do have a little leak out the pressure gauge. Probably not enough Teflon on there when I put it on. This was a quarter of the price of a comparable one at Sloan Express. Theirs did look nicer, but it was also $900, and this one at Rural King is like $220. Of course, I probably had to pay tax, and the Sloan Express one would have been tax-free, I think. Still, I could afford a lot of these at that price difference. Yes, there is a slight leak. I would argue that every good sprayer has at least one leak on it. That's been my experience. For the record, that was definitely sarcasm. You don't want to leak on a sprayer. Always got to appreciate the view from Dad. He's got such an eagle's nest perspective of the farm. You can see a lot of our land back there. Everything looks good from the road. Don't know if that's true out in the field. We may see later. I'm out doing a little bit of weed eating, a little bit of field edge spraying, and some crop scouting at the same time. And it's got me thinking about the infamous Pro Farmer Tour that's going on right now across the heart of the Corn Belt. As of today, which is Thursday the 22nd, maybe, I don't know, don't quote me on that, of August, they've gone through most of everything. They haven't finished Illinois yet. USDA has Illinois at a record corn crop, 225 bushels an acre on average. Keep in mind that includes some less productive ground too, so a 225 is a massive record for Illinois. I think a lot of that is based on satellite imagery, NDVI, and maybe some farmer surveys. And it's a good time as ever to go out and look at some of our corn and get a really rough estimate of what our yield potential may or may not be. It also happens to just be a magnificent day outside. It's kind of cool, fall-esque weather. It's 50 degrees this morning, high in the mid-70s. It's going to warm back up later this week. We're going to walk out into some middle of the season, which would be like May, early May, planted Beck 6374, highly managed, good ground, a lot of dirt work done on here to work with the water. We know this is a good hybrid. We've grown 270 bushel corn out here. And let's see what happens when we go out and do our little equation and calculating. The plant health out here is absolutely insane. It feels like I'm walking through a bamboo forest. Not that I've ever done that, just what it feels like. You can tell the Hagee didn't even scoff at the bamboo forest. A lot of moisture under the canopy. They had an inch of rain up here last week. Definitely gonna help bring yield up a lot. That's not entirely true. You can't ever really bring yield up, you just keep it from going down. This should have good test weight. The hardest part about doing a yield check in corn and beans both isn't the math, isn't doing any of the calculating. That's easy, relatively speaking. It's actually just picking one spot that seems fair. Our farm, compared to the Illinois as a whole, is like a speck of sand on a beach. Comparatively, picking one spot in a 50-acre field is like a speck on the beach of a speck on the beach. So that's what's really hard to get a really accurate representation. Some of you are probably familiar with this process. I don't normally do it this formally. Put a tape measure down on 30-inch rows, go 17.5 feet. Oh man, we were so close. Man, that's a lot of feet. Okay, there's our mark. Look at this dirt. Beautiful farm. On your 17.5 feet, you go down the row, you count how many viable plants there are. So here, I counted 35,000 on this side. That's pretty good considering we dropped 37. Really good emergence out of the 6374. And then a lot of people just go to the other side and do the same thing to get an average. 35 here to the south. 1, 2. I'm at 5, but then you got this thing right here. That's not a viable plant. This doesn't even have an ear on it. So we got some kind of a gap for some reason there. I counted 35 and then 33, which gives you an average of 34,000 plants an acre in this one specific spot. That'd basically be, what, a 95% emergence. That's pretty good, honestly, better than what I've seen in a lot of fields this year. I don't know if our winter annual pressure hurt our emergence or 95% is good enough. I mean, you really, if you drop 37, you want 37. We dropped 36 on some farms, and I was counting 32, so you don't seem to ever get them all. The next part, which is arguably the hardest part in terms of how you do it, is deciding what ears you take. Some people say take the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th. Other people say look at the ones that are average. I'm just gonna take 5 or 6 in a row because I think that gives you the best representation, maybe more. I'm not gonna take this one because there's a gap there. Oh, there's a couple gaps there. See, this is complicated. There we go. Not very easy to get out of a field with 34,000 very healthy plants an acre and a camera and 6 ears. Immediately out of the gate, I see something that's concerning. It was kind of an agronomic bulletin point this season, some aphid presence. It can be a non-event, and it can also be very bad. We do not believe on a lot of our farms in spraying insecticide with our corn fungicide. The data is not very consistent. However, this could be a year where aphid feeding like that might actually have made insecticide a no-brainer, and we may need to address that going forward, might make it standard practice, or at least have to scout more aggressively. Next part obviously is shucking the ears. Because this is pretty thick, I don't think the ears are gonna be baseball bats by any means. It's not a bad looking ear. A little bit of tip back. Dry June could have hurt it. Late planting could have hurt it. Another consistent ear. Here's one that had a little bit of that aphid feeding on it. The ear itself, though, is actually more impressive than the other ears that didn't have aphid feeding. Maybe we need more aphids. At this point, you do your calculations. You say how many around are these ears, how long are they to get your kernel count per ear, and then you average them all together. I'm a lazy millennial, though, and thanks to Corteva's granular system, if I can pull this farm up, they have an automatic yield checking system. So you go out in the field, I drop my pin where I think I pulled that, next, and it'll actually do the math on these ears for me. That one was 530 kernels. That was 553, 527, pretty consistent. 545, 530, wow, that's impressively consistent. 533, 545, those were all within 30 kernels an ear of each other. Like this one is a shorter ear with more tip back, but it could be a larger diameter ear, more kernels around. And the ears, although they look different, do kind of flex around a little bit like that to compensate for each other. Most people are gonna look for 14 to 18 around as an optimal ear in higher populations. You can see some 20s, although it's unlikely unless you're in a thin population or a specific hybrid. 16's probably average. You're going to get some 18s, you're going to get some 14s. Your length could be anywhere from 30 to 60, more like 30 to 50, depending on the hybrid, depending on the population, and sometimes the rows around determine the length because some with more around don't grow as long, they tip back more. Back to your math, you take your average here, you multiply it by your population. So we guesstimated 34,000 plants an acre. You would take your, let's say, 530 kernel count and multiply those across, and then you need to get from kernels to bushels, and the starting standard for corn is about 90,000 kernels per bushel. So you take, let's say, 530 average kernels per ear times 34,000, and then you would divide it by 90,000. With the ear size I'm seeing, the plant health I'm seeing, and the projected probably pretty good test weights anymore, a lot of guys think 90,000 is an outdated metric. A lot of people like to use 75,000, which really brings that yield up because it's less kernels have more weight. Some hybrids I've heard are in the upper 60,000s, which would be even denser. Others may actually be closer to 80 to 90. So that's the hard part about this. If you wanted to actually know, you would need to take all the kernels out, dry them, and then weigh them. But we don't have enough time for that. The granular app basically does the same thing. You go in there, you put your stand in, 34,000, and then your kernels per bushel. At 75,000, it's saying an estimated yield of 243 bushels an acre. If this corn's heavier, if it's in that 70,000 range, you're talking 261. If it's lighter, 80,000 kernels per bushel. That's 228. This is one of those fields, in my opinion, that has such high production potential. We know we have a good hybrid out here, Beck 6374. I'm gonna be a little disappointed if it's any less than 240, 250 maybe. I'm looking for 300 in every field. I know that's unrealistic, but we gotta take what we're given. This field was planted at the beginning of May, or maybe that first week of May, and I think early to mid-May is probably gonna be the poor spot for yields. Things that were planted earlier are going to be better. In my opinion, it's the way the statistics normally work out. Plants get developed, get ahead of the dry June, the heat, and for some reason it always benefits them. This corn has a really long way to go for being 113-day corn at the end of August. The milk line is just barely a quarter of the way down from the top. I'd bet we're still at least 2 weeks away from black layer. I doubt we pick much corn at all in September. If anything, we may not pick anything till October. Time will tell. That's some really good looking corn in my opinion. I think it'll harvest heavier and higher yielding than just a basic 240. I'm looking for 250 to 260 plus out here. Really good dirt, good genetics, treated well. And I'm actually going to go to our field to the south here. That's a Pioneer 109-day corn. I can't remember. That was planted 3 weeks earlier, 2 weeks earlier. You can see the corn shorter. Earlier corn doesn't grow as tall and it shrinks earlier because it matures faster. You'll definitely see a noticeable difference in maturity out there. You can just from the road. I don't have as high of yield expectations for this farm versus that farm, but I think genetics aside, the earlier planted stuff is going to have an advantage. It always does. And it almost makes me wonder, I should have not have waited on this. It was a little bit on the heavy side. I thought that was a good idea in April to not mud it in, and maybe I should have just mudded it in. Just got back out of that north field. Keep in mind, it's twice the size of this field, arguably a little less productive dirt. The corn was planted 2 to 3 weeks earlier. I thought that gave it a little bit of an advantage. My visual observations were that there was minimal aphid pressure. I did notice the corn obviously was much farther along because not only was it planted earlier, it was a 109-day corn. I can't remember the hybrid, 0953 or something like that. Inherently, the 113-day Beck's corn should out yield this if they were in the same field, because people will always say that adding relative maturity to your corn gives you a couple bushels per day. I can't quote the science on that one. Just because longer season corn grows for longer, it should have more chance to get bigger ears, pack more starch in. Two very distinct observations in that field were that there was a lot of runts in the stand, meaning I saw about 32,000 on average where I counted maybe 33,000. We only dropped like 35,000 out there, but there was a lot of them that the corn plants just didn't look that good. They don't have a big ear on them. They're behind their neighbors. I wonder if that relates back to our winter annual pressure, planting through those big clumps of henbit chickweed, and maybe that's costing us more money than we realize. If you shave a couple thousand plants an acre off your stand, that's a lot of corn over the grand scheme of things. So I think that has something to do with it. And secondly, a lot more disease pressure in this field. It was planted 3 weeks earlier. It was sprayed 3 weeks earlier, probably 2 weeks earlier. It was farther along. I don't think I meant to grab that one. This was an ear leaf I found. Maybe. Actually, no, I did need that one. This was an ear leaf I found. There is a little bit of tar spot coming in here, these black pustules on the leaves. Pretty late in the season, you're gonna see disease come in. This has been sprayed for every bit of 4+ weeks now, and just to see a few specks of tar spot, not that concerning. That's not a good one to start on, geez. I felt a couple of these had like some kind of weird pollination issue just by grabbing the ear. A lot of inconsistency out there. In the world, oh my gosh, something like this would have happened. Holy cow. It's a Frankenstein ear. Could have been that it was so dry when this corn shot tassels in June, it wasn't raining, that it actually did some damage. And maybe the later planted corn will get around that issue. I don't really know. Some of these are ugly. A little more ear rot starting to move in. Don't like to see that. There's a lot on this Pioneer I'm not liking. The only thing the Beck's had that I didn't like was the aphid pressure. This is farther along though, so it's more susceptible to some of these issues. Except for I didn't see this in the Beck's corn. I have no idea how this happened. If you pretend that these aren't poorly pollinated on the back side, they actually all look really good. Except for this one again. This one's ugly and very disappointing to see. First ear, 720 kernels, 625. I don't even know how you fairly do this one. 600, another ugly one. Another 600. 670, a lot higher ear count. 743, how does that have 743? 400? No, that's not right. We'll do the ugly side, I think that's fair. 397, well, it says so. run our estimate. What did we say? I can't remember. 33,000 plants. I think it was actually closer to 34. At 90,000, that's 228 bushel an acre. So if we go to 75, that's 273. I find that hard to believe. At 70, 293. I mean, I would be happy, but I don't believe that. At 80, 1.6 million. Okay, I messed something up there, folks. Divided by 80. At 80, that's 256. Who knows? What's really complicated about this, like I mentioned when we first started, picking a fair spot is impossible. The only way to actually know how the field yields is to take a combine out there and then get your dry weights at the end of the field. I have no bias in this. I know I work with Pioneer on promotional stuff. I think they have some really strong offerings, specifically in the longer season, 114 day to 117 day corn. I've had some really good luck with this Bex corn as well. I mean, it's been some of our top corn. I'm glad I'm not a seed salesman because I would hate to have to sell against them. Phenomenal products. And then of course, you know, their company as a whole, it's hard to disagree with some of their messaging, you know, family-based values, not corporate. I would be really surprised if the Pioneer corn, because it's shorter season corn, beats the Bex corn. Just my 10 cents. I could have picked a bad spot in the Bex field and a good spot in the Pioneer field. Could have done the opposite. This could be a bad spot for this field, and this field makes 300. This field could make 300. Hopefully it all makes 300 because we got to out yield these poor prices. The hard part about farming is you always hope that you have the biggest crop possible, and the best thing that can happen for you financially is that all of your neighbors and everyone else in the world has a terrible crop, which is a really toxic way to view it. It is the reality of supply and demand. What's bad for your neighbors and for Iowa and Nebraska and South America a lot of times is good for you, because if they do bad, you usually get higher prices. With that being said, I'm not in the business of rooting against people. I hope everyone finds success. It's just negative to hope people fail, companies fail, countries fail. I mean, there's a few of those I could root against, but it's one of those deals. We'll go look at some more corn after I do some more spraying, some walking of some edges, and see what we're dealing with here. I'm happy these fields look okay. Objectively, the Bex corn, while you walk through it, looks better than the Pioneer corn. We'll see what happens. I can tell you that spot right there is not going to be a record breaker. The deer probably look pretty good though, if they're eating that good. It's amazing the amount of damage they'll do to a cornfield, and sometimes beans. After a few more hours of cleaning up around fields, I stopped behind home into some mid-May planted 14830. This is a 95 acre field. First thing I noticed, very strong stand. I think we targeted 35,000 and I averaged 34.5, and I measured that with a tape measure, meaning that's good. Not a lot of runts in terms of plant structure. One of these ears does look a little small without opening it up. No disease pressure at all. I mean, the plant health is immaculate on that 14830. That's probably partially because it was later planted. It's not as far along, and we got the Mirvis Neo on it. I do notice some very minimal aphid feeding or aphid presence. I mean, not very much at all. That's something to consider. Stands good, as I mentioned. Let's dive into these. That's not a good start. A lot of potential there that for some reason didn't come to fruition. Could have been the high population, I don't know. Those average out to a pretty good ear. That's a monster. All I did was just pull 7 in a row. This may not be the order they were in, or it could be, I'm not sure, probably not. We got high expectations for this 14830. It beat a channel number by 30 bushels an acre, a little less than 30 bushels an acre last fall on a pretty productive farm. To be fair, that Bex stuff beat some Pioneer stuff 2 years ago on that first field of Bex we checked by about 30 bushels an acre on a field average, not just one check. The whole field was 30 bushels better. Having 34,500 plants in the spot we checked, I mean, that all adds up to give you better yield. I can tell you, even with this runt ear, looking at these things, it's going to be pretty big. The number's going to be big. I don't know what happened with this. Could have been a late bloomer, and then one of these monsters next to it maybe overshadowed it. So it could have a neighboring plant with a bigger ear because one's not as good. There's really no explanation. Could have been a winter annual clod there that we planted through. Definitely something we have to look into, but there's no way to definitively say why this happened. Start with the worst one. 368 kernels. That's not great. 714. That's really great. 589. 798 right there, folks. 888, how is that even possible? 888 kernels on that one. Let me see that. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 around by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 18 by 36, 37 if you stop before these last few. Some people don't count those. It's hard saying. This year could technically still tip back a little bit. I'm no mathematologist, but I can tell you if you pop in a 34,500 stand on this, and even at 90,000, this thing's saying 253 bushels an acre, and that's at 90. And on those other fields, we dropped her to 75,000 kernels per bushel. Oh man, I don't even want to see that. That's gonna break my heart. No way it makes that. There's no way it's that good. It said 304. I must have picked a good spot. 70,000, 325, no chance. 80,000 kernels per bushel, so if it's a little lighter, 285. I'm actually shocked that that is even showing that high. Could have got a really lucky spot. I would argue that where I was isn't even the most fertile part of the farm. Even with this runt ear, they all averaged out to a high enough kernel count per acre. If we get the weight, it's going to be a big one here. Based off of what I saw last year, the small sample size of this 14830 we had, if you do not have this number on your farm, you got to give it a shot. We're going to go look at some early planted 1742 PCE. That's Pioneer's longer season contender with this 14830. I think this is arguably a higher top end yielding hybrid. We are on probably what I would say is one of our more productive farms on average. There's spots out there that aren't great. Maybe I picked a good one. We're right behind home. I live there where those trees are, so the main farm's just 100 foot to the east, maybe a little more. Sweet corn patch here. It's about run its course. This definitely has, and the south one later planted, it's getting kind of too hard to eat. Usually one of our best cornfields, usually really good beans. Across the road we've got some March beans. Usually one of our best cornfields out here, but the beans are never as good. I don't know why. Could be drainage. Let's go look at that 117-day Pioneer. Here is that early planted first day of corn planting, Pioneer 1742 Power Core Enlist corn. We've got the chrome version as well. Walking into the field, noticed a very good, healthy stand. Plants were sturdy, pretty far along. Definitely just some disease starting to work itself into the canopy. Again, northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, a little bit of tar spot lower. No rust to speak of. Looks like we're in pretty good shape coming into the end. I still cannot explain the runts I'm seeing. I don't know what it's got to be the winter annuals, unless we have some kind of insect feeding, because you'll have absolute monster ears, probably offsetting some of these ones, and then you'll have these ones. I really don't know. We'll start pulling them back. I was shocked. 34,000 plus stand out there. Honestly, it's probably closer to 35, but I don't like to overstate. I know we targeted 35 out there. Getting 100% stands not really super believable. 34,000. Again, some of them are like this, so you know, if of that 34,000, if a couple of them look like that, I know how that affects the calculation, but I just don't know where you draw the line between what do you count and what do you don't. A little bit of ear mold going on. Hate to see that. This 1742 gets this really distinct pink look to it. Something I've not seen before. Hybrid specific. That ear doesn't have any kind of infection. And there's a runt. Looks like junk. Smaller ear. That looks like a completely different hybrid. Finishing up with another monstrous ear, but still some rotting going on in it. We'll do another little yield check with granular here. Drop our pin. That one's heavy. 811 kernels. 462. 150, that'll bring the average down. 714. 827, wow. 841 on that one, that's going to be the big one. 643, I'll be lucky to be 100. 199, I don't know about that. I can only do 8 ears. These two would bring the average up pretty significantly, but I'm just going to run it here. 34,000 stand with these 8 ears, including what I would call the two and a half runt ears. 90,000 kernels per bushel, that's 219 bushels an acre. If we go to 75,000, 263. These would have brought that average way up, but I got to draw the line somewhere. I mean, that's a good looking ear of corn. The 1742 shows a lot of promise. I still think the 14830 looks better from what I'm seeing in the field. It's healthier ears, but that is a monster. Oh my goodness. You can knock someone out with that thing. Can't decide if this makes me excited to harvest or nervous to harvest, because we're gonna have some good stuff and some not so good stuff. Wonder what the yield calculations would be if I just pulled them all from the outside row, where they've probably got 1,000 kernels an ear.
What are you doing, boys?
I'm doing picking. I'm going out in my Jeep.
Throughout the last week and while I've been doing some yield checks on these fields, I've noticed an interesting pattern. On the end rows of the corn, particularly where the long rows meet the end row, every other round there was some much lighter corn, almost like a nitrogen deficiency. That's the way it was visually showing up. I had a theory as to what it might have been, so while I was at lunch, got the drone out, which is fun for me and fun for Lenny. He likes droning as well. And we took it up, we flew around some fields, and I'm thinking what I'm seeing is that the custom side dress bar that puts 32 on does not have their on and off timings right, because you can see very clearly on a few farms where there's about a 30-foot gap every 60 foot, perfectly in line with the planter passes, not on an off pass, where there's no nitrogen, or I guess you'd say a lot less nitrogen due to the visual yellowing. It's particularly more evident in our earlier planted fields. They're farther along. That's when a lack of nitrogen starts to show up. We do run fall anhydrous, about half of our nitrogen load, and whatever you count from dry fertilizer. I don't know that a lot of that made it to the spring, in my honest opinion, because of how warm it is in the winter and how much rain we got in late March and April, early May. I don't think that's a good combination. I'm not a fan of fall anhydrous, but a lot of people, my dad included, like it because it's cheap and logistically sound. Even with a nitrification inhibitor, which is just more money spent, seems like a not very sound decision to put your nitrogen on 9 months ahead of when you need it. I mean, this is when we need nitrogen right now, July, August. Those are the two most critical months. You can see where the side dress bar didn't put nitrogen down. It's obvious that we don't have enough, not that we put enough on to begin with. So something's missing out there. That's definitely something to look into. And I also noticed flying across our March planted beans, you can visually see where I put that ATS on in the spring. The beans are greener in those two strips. It's as visible as it could possibly be out in the field, surprisingly. So maybe there'll be something there on the yield monitor. And of course, I'm noticing all sorts of tiles I never knew were there. Again, there's some fields, the later planted fields, the beans are greener where the tile is. And on the earlier planted fields, a lot of times, because the beans are maturing, they're actually farther along where the tile is, because that soil was drier and warmer earlier, allowing the beans to get a head start, and they finish sooner. So a lot to be seen this time of year from the drone. I like getting it up and analyzing those things. Chris just pulled in from mowing. I'm gonna try to shine up the lower half of the headgear. Still got a lot of corn tassels on here. I need to get out before they rot completely. I'm gonna do a little power washing, blow it off a little bit beforehand. Hopefully it'll look a little better. I'd say I got 75% of the tassel material off. Also pulled the row feelers off because I think we're done post-spraying tall corn, and they're just kind of out there jiggling around when you're not using them. Gonna fire up the power washer after I take these back to store them. Okay, we're done with that. The undercarriage is about as clean as I am good looking. I'll let you interpret that how you will. Today's video is once again brought to you by the worldwide leader in innovative crop protectants, from seed treatments to foliar disease protection and everything in between, Syngenta. On top of being tremendous supporters of the channel and what we do here to promote agriculture, they also happen to have some of the best products in the chemistry marketplace right now. Acuron and Storin on the corn side, Miravis Neo Top and Ace on the corn, soybean, and wheat fungicide, Sultro for sudden death syndrome on soybeans, Cruiser Max Apex for general broad spectrum soybean seed treatment, and last and certainly not least, what I want to talk to you about today is Tendovo, their new soybean herbicide residual product. I know what you're thinking. Why are you talking about Tendovo while standing next to a field infested with our beloved water hemp? Isn't Tendovo supposed to stop water hemp from growing? The answer to that question is yes. However, this field was applied with a competitive Group 15-1 mode of action herbicide, very prominent in the marketplace, something we've used on our farm for a long time, relatively cost effective and somewhat effective in its job, but it highlights an issue that we're seeing and a reason that we're actually debating on switching 100% of our pre-emergence residual business to Tendovo by Syngenta. Once water hemp is out of the ground, if it is not stopped immediately in the first couple inches below ground or the first couple inches above ground, you are going to have one heck of a time controlling it with post-emergence options. This is a beautiful, close to the finish field of March planted enlist soybeans, and you can see that we weren't even able to control the water hemp with a high dollar post pass. Water hemp is just the orneriest, most persistent little devil. Our post-emergence pass with plenty of active ingredients, plenty of surfactant load, plenty of carrier rate, burnt the main trunk off, and yet the water hemp grew back out of it a month or two later, and it's thriving and on its way to producing a lot more seeds than I want to think about if I want to sleep tonight. What gives? They're all across this field. I don't think we cut any corners either as an operation. We did what I believe was a very effective job of trying to stay ahead of water hemp and keep it down. And the post-emergence options are limited, and we can't legally at this point do anything in this field other than walking it by hand and foot with a hoe to clean up this water hemp. We're off label, and we probably would lose some yield if we applied any of those herbicides that these beans are tolerant to. It all stems back to that problem of cutting corners I always talk about. Even in what I think is a pretty thorough program, we still are not doing enough to keep the water hemp from coming out of the ground. In corn, you have a little bit more flexibility with the HPPDs, the Group 27s, that can sometimes control water hemp, although we don't want to rely on it. In soybeans, even our traded resistant herbicides for the beans that they can tolerate are not surefire in terminating water hemp. Even if you tank mix all three of the traded herbicides for these E3 beans, I have seen pretty consistent misses of water hemp on other farms. Even with these newest genetic platforms, we as farmers have to stop fooling ourselves that we have so many tools in the toolbox for controlling water hemp once it comes up. The most effective way to stop weeds like water hemp, in my experience, and probably Palmer amaranth too, its ornery cousin, is to keep it from coming out of the ground. Here's another one of our fields of soybeans. It's almost nightmarish to look out across the horizon there and see the sheer number of water hemp that our post-emergence pass did not terminate. Our program was robust. We layered residuals in with post. These are just water hemps that fell through the cracks on that post-emergence pass. There's nothing new out there. These are ones that survived chemistries that we're supposed to be relying on for cleaning up our soybeans after they're out of the ground. Our only legal option on this field right now would be to walk it by hand, which is physically impossible. There's too much water hemp and too much ground to cover out there. The only hope in this situation is knowing how effective Acuron and Storin are for keeping this clean next year. This year, though, it's a train wreck. Like the first field, this is the same competitor's Group 15 product, probably the most hot product in the market right now for controlling small-seeded broadleafs, and it's just not enough, folks. We need to do more. We probably have to bring in more robust chemical programs up front to keep water hemp from coming out of the ground. teleport a mile east of the main farm with a storm in the background, how poetic, to a very high pressure field where I know Dad and I have spent many summers walking beans for years, and we have an almost spotless canopy across the field. Despite high weed pressure, a lot of water hemp in the soil, seed bank, water damage in spots, thin stands and spots from rabbits and other critters that come out here, deer, we have next to no water hemp above the canopy right now, which is quite the accolade this year for us and for a lot of growers. We're not the only ones having issues. This clean field of nice looking soybeans, which also happens to be right next to the highway, that's extremely important, you need your cleanest fields where everyone's going to see them, is provided by Syngenta's Tendovo. I ran 2 quarts an acre out here pre-plant, and I'm shocked at how well it did keeping the water hemp down. There's spots out here where the canopy isn't even technically covering the ground all the way, and there's no water hemp making its way through, unlike some of these other fields. I'm far from a scientist. I'm not a technical agronomist. I'm just a regular farmer that some of you occasionally like to watch. And my 10 cents on this matter is that Tendovo provides the full package, whereas right now in a lot of our acres, we're relying on effective chemistries, but just one of them. We need to be bringing more to the table pre-plant to keep water hemp from emerging, because once it is out of the ground, it is like a freight train fully loaded without brakes. It just grows so fast and can metabolize so many different things thrown at it. It's really hard to control. Tendovo brings multiple effective modes of action to the table, to the field, to help suppress that water hemp out of the gate, so we're not relying so much on those post-emergence tools, and we don't have to have them be 100% effective to have clean fields. Again, it's not like our operation or you guys watching who are struggling with water hemp are alone. We all have issues with it. It's very hard to control. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to just keep it from coming out of the ground. Singular modes of action, yes, they may work sometimes on some years. On your most challenging years like this, though, you want to bring a full package, and I think Tendovo has that. It also has some added strength against some giant ragweed. I know some people deal with that. I've been really impressed with the Tendovo we've had on our farm. I've talked to other growers in the area who've been shocked at how well it's worked versus competitive products. It is a phenomenal pre-emergence option. It is a premium. It does have a big active ingredient load. I do think it's worth the money though, because it brings clean fields to the table. I've been impressed all year driving by this field with just how clean it is. It's amazing that just adding multiple chemistries to the tank as opposed to relying on one can change the equation so quickly in your favor. The added benefit of Tendovo versus some other products on the market, not necessarily the Group 15 that we use, is that it is very crop safe. That was one of the primary design metrics when Syngenta put this concoction together. Like with their corn blends, they don't want to hurt the growing crop when it comes to protecting it from weeds. There are a lot of residual chemistries with soybeans that you need to be very careful of. Even if you don't recognize it, they're slowing them down and they're ultimately costing you yield. I know we're not the only ones struggling with water hemp. I can see everyone in the area is struggling with it too. If you're growing corn and soybeans and you are as well, don't be afraid to talk to your retailers, your neighbors, see what they're doing. Maybe see if Tendovo is a good fit for you. When I put the Tendovo down on this farm this spring with the Hagee pre-plant, I didn't really think it would be this effective, especially compared to some of those other fields I showed you that I would consider lower pressure fields. And again, I'm just blown away with the performance out here. Talked a lot about corn in this video. I think the estimate is that we're definitely going to be roughly around our average last year. I think we were like 235-ish dry. Can't recall exactly. Soybeans, it's so much harder to guess on them. I think our March beans look phenomenal. Really good yield potential. Some of them I'm gonna be disappointed if they make anything less than 80 to 90, although anything's possible. Some of our later planted beans, which look pretty healthy from the road, minus wherever there's extreme water damage, look green. I just don't know that we're gonna have the pod counts at the finish line, so we'll see what happens there. Right now, my curiosity is getting the best of me. I'm walking out here to visually inspect the ammonium thiosulfate pre-plant treatment that we did crossways on this farm where the March beans are that we could see with the drone. Interestingly enough, it's not showing up across the road where I ran a little bit lighter of a rate. There could be a dose dependent response on a treatment like this. I've never seen such a staunch visual difference though from treated to non-treated with a foliar, or sorry, not foliar, just a fertilizer based application like ATS. Green does not always mean more yield, it just means greener. Sometimes the field's greener, sometimes your wallet's greener. Doesn't always equate the way it looks. I have two 120-foot boom passes. This was with pre-plant, so it doesn't follow my post passes here. I'm just using them to walk out. I definitely saw 120 foot there, and then 120 foot a couple rounds over there. We're gonna have one heck of a strip though for data come harvest time. Based on my operations center map, I actually have a round here, or round and a half, and then 2 rounds to the south, or round and a half to the south. There's another 2 passes side by side. From the air, it's so obvious. You see it and you're like, wow, like that stands out like a sore thumb. Then you walk out to the field and you're like, where was that even at? I can kind of see in there's a real dark green band. It's not everywhere though. I'm on what should be the edge of the north lane of treatment. You can kind of see the line in here somewhere. I think I had a slight northwesternly angle on it. Definitely greener where it was applied, but I'm not seeing anything that stands out as just crazy better. They all look the same. They look like soybeans. It's probably gonna end up exactly like I predicted. You're not gonna know if there's a difference until you run the combine, and any trial you run is going to be secondary to the main issue this year, which is going to be too much water. It seems like these darker areas where there was too much water is where it's showing up. So hopefully there's a yield advantage. Maybe we hurt our beans and they're behind because of the ATS. I'd find that hard to believe. They look pretty good though. I think there's a lot of yield potential out here. Beans aren't necessarily that tall because they're mature. There's a lot of pods. I mean, there's a lot of beans here, folks. Unless this field somehow surprises me to the bottom side, based on how this season went for us and what I'm seeing, I don't see any reason why, if conditions are favorable, you have ideal seed bed, a farmer doesn't just plant as many beans as possible in March, only if the ground is fit. Worked out really well here. I know a lot of guys who've actually been doing it for quite a few years now with seed treatments, a product like Saltro for SDS that actually helps against red crown rot a little bit too. It's a no-brainer. Put them in the ground, folks. Maximize yield, and with the very, very competitive early replant policies, you're not going to lose. I talked to our dealer at formerly Alliance Tractor, now Sloan's, to see if maybe they could take one of their 50 spare X9s they're sitting on and possibly let us demo one when we cut these beans here in another few weeks. Because one, we really want to see an X9 specifically in soybeans, and two, be a heck of a show. Anyways, the video machine is running out of battery, don't have a spare, and it's going to take me at least another half an hour to get out of this field. Actually, not really. I'm only like 5 minutes away. Nothing else interesting happening today. Hopefully we start preparing for harvest soon. I think we will. Catch you on the next episode, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in. See you later. Peace!